This looks promising. Nice paper-covered board, stamped with a wreath, and in here the character Jew. Have you ever seen that?
Yes, I've seen it on there, but
do you know what it means?
No.
It means long life.
Oh, yes.
And inside, just what one would expect to find, page after page of Japanese prints. All printed in colours from wood blocks. Do you know how they're done?
Yes, each colour is put on separately.
That's right, exactly, and then printed in one go.
That's right.
And they didn't use a printing press. That's the difference between Western technology and Japan, is that they placed the paper on the carved wooden block and then rubbed it. And quite often, I don't know if we can see it anywhere on any of these, you can actually see lines, indeed you can on here, where they've scrubbled it round a bit and the line has come through. Now that's, and you get it again in the sky, and that adds texture and excitement to it. These started being made in the 17th century in numbers, and they were the equivalent of comics of the time. Largely the populace couldn't read, which is why you don't get a lot of text to it. And they illustrate scenes from the theatre, from drama, and later on in the 19th century you even get things like the Americans and English who were resident in Japan. The colours are quite extraordinary, and they've never been seen in the West at all. The interesting thing is that once they were sort of run off, they became scrap paper, just like yesterday's newspaper. And a lot of the ceramics that came out of Japan in the second half of the 19th century arrived in Europe wrapped up in screwed up prints. And they got to, the interesting thing is they got to France and they were unwrapped. And today we're sort of kind of familiar with these, but you've got to try and place yourself in the 19th century. You have seen nothing like this at all. You've got no conception of the way the Japanese looked at life. They had a completely different spatial outlook. They weren't interested in perspective. They've got no sense of perspective at all. This scene here is of a fence with a garden, with a lady behind a screen. But it's quite flat. You don't get any idea of depth because the Japanese never discovered it. And so when these arrived in France, they were passed around the Impressionist painters, and they were absolutely, their minds were blown by these extraordinary designs. And this led on to Impressionism. Well, people don't realize quite how important they are. These are by a man called Toyokuni, who was one of the most prolific makers of prints in the 19th century. Where did you come by this album?
Well, my husband found it in a little antique shop, or it was more a junk shop than an antique shop, in Forest Hill in 1947-48.
Really?
And we paid 25 shillings for it.
A pound or so. I mean, quite extraordinary.
His interest in it was because he was interested in swords and...
oh, right. Well, we've got quite a lot of...
quite a lot of sword play in it.
Yeah.
And that's why.
The interesting thing about a Japanese book is that once you've got to the end, you move it over here,
that's it.
and you turn it over, and then it runs back the other way. So it's on both sides. So you get twice as much for your money. In fact, there is going to be about... Do you know how many there are in here?
Oh, I can't remember now. We did count at one time.
I think there are about 40 in here.
I think that's about it.
So 40 times 2 is 80. I mean, the album's going to be worth 20 to 30 pounds per page.
Oh!
We're looking at somewhere around £2,500 to £3,500.
Really?
25 shillings has worked into £2,500. Not a bad buy. Thank you very much for bringing it in. Thank you.
Thank you.